Psalm 13. To the chief musician, a psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him. Lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me. Let's look a little closer at this. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? I'm sure you noticed that he begins with questions. There's three interrogatives. How long will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? I've been thinking about this, and I'm wondering, when's the last time you began with prayer? When you started praying, just immediately with questions. Maybe you never ask questions. That would be interesting. So, have you ever felt that God has forgotten you? Even worse, that your loss, just a loss of intimacy with God. I'm sure that if you have, it's been very overwhelming to the point that it seems like it's never going to end. God's face is not something we can look on, and as we see in this passage, and when he's speaking to Moses, he said, "You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live," in Exodus 33:20. But when his face is upon us, we have his blessing. We have that priestly blessing in the end of chapter 6 of Numbers. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. It's very interesting. We'll look at that a few other times, but it's nice to know that when his face is upon us, he is gracious to us. So the loss of God's face is the loss of God's grace. And that does not ever feel good. I don't know what circumstance that would be where it would feel good, but that never is going to be a good situation. So, in that case, David wants to know how long it will be. How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? So he's speaking to his soul. Again, we've seen this as a part of his pattern. He speaks to himself, encourages himself, but sometimes he's very honest in his questions to his soul, taking counsel for the situation that he finds himself enduring, which causes his heart pain. So I don't know if you're going through anything, but if your heart is going through some pain, it's not unnoticed by God. It's not something that you're going through alone. So please don't think that you are. And everybody seems to have to go through this dark night of the soul, just where everything seems dark. There seems to be no answers. There seems to be a lot of questions and no relief to that feeling. But I think the next question is interesting. How long will my enemy be exalted over me? It's not so much a question as much as it is a challenge to God, because our enemy is the enemy of God as well. So this is a prompt for God to deal with the enemy. In Revelation chapter 12, John exposes the true character of the enemy. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Satan is an interesting word coming from the Hebrew. It's a transliteration into English, and it literally means adversary. But when we get to John chapter 10, Jesus also reveals his modus operandi, how he operates, what he does, why he does it. And in referring to him as the thief, Jesus said, he does not come except to steal, to kill, and destroy, in John 10:10. So if there's a lot of stuff going on in your life and you think things are being stolen, things are being killed, things are being destroyed, you know that is the enemy. Our confidence, though, is that Jesus has defeated the enemy. Again in Revelation, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented night and day forever. So it's important that you see one of the things that the enemy does is deceive or try to deceive people. And the reason he does that is because it ultimately breaks the fellowship that we have with God, breaks the fellowship we have with each other. Verse 3, consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. So he's finished asking questions, but so now he begins with imperatives, and that's always nice to see. So we go from questioning, asking God some serious questions, and then immediately beginning after that with some imperatives. He tells God to consider and hear him. He seeks enlightenment for his eyes, a vision of who God is, his truth, and his commandments. Paul had a similar experience, and he explains that when he encountered Jesus Christ, he was commissioned to the Gentiles to open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. And Jesus was speaking at that point. Sanctified by faith in Christ. This is a powerful verse. I mean, look at that. To open their eyes. So in other words, we're walking around, but we're blind. Spiritually. We're walking around in darkness, and we don't have any light until Christ comes into our life. And the power of Satan, because we're under his control, because we're not giving ourselves over to God. If we don't give ourselves to God and we're not walking in his grace, then we're under the power of Satan. So Paul's commission was to turn people from the power of Satan to God so that we can receive the forgiveness of sins. What a wonderful thing to have. And of course, as a result of that, having an inheritance, which is eternal life among those who are sanctified by faith. Verse 4, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. Again, when you look at this a little closer, I think it's very interesting. David's concern wasn't so much about himself, but for the reputation of God. So think about that in your prayers. Are we more concerned about God's reputation than our own? David says that the enemy's victory would tarnish God's glory. David is concerned for God's glory, but I think he's using that as well to motivate God so that it doesn't happen. Very important. Remember, this is so important. Our warfare is not against flesh and blood. It may seem like it is, because the intensity of whatever's happening is right there in front of you. And of course, you're dealing with people. So when that happens, you're specifically looking at the natural. And we need to be looking at the supernatural, because we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, not against each other, but against spiritual wickedness in high places. And we have been equipped with an armor from God to do spiritual battle. That's in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 20. Definitely recommend you being very familiar with that passage. Paul also informs us that in regard to the tactics of the enemy, that he steals, kills, and destroys our relationship with God and with each other, and sometimes the things we have. We saw that in the book of Job, that given the license to afflict Job, he gave him some terrible afflictions on his body, but prior to that, he took everything that he had except for his wife, his children, all the things that he owned, and completely destroyed them and killed them. And that is the way he works. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy, to deceive, and to bring us a lot of pain because of our walk with God. But Paul tells us that we will not be taken advantage by Satan, for we are not unaware of his intentions. Or another version says, not unaware of his devices, his tactics, how he actually does these things to try to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I don't know if you've been to the new pizza place in Grove City, but on the other side, near the outlets, I had some kind of artist pizza. I can't remember what it is, but on the other side there was a taco place, and there was a very interesting picture of a whole bunch of sheep, very, very complacent, very, very at ease. But right in the middle of them, there was this huge lion. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. Because when the lion was there, and it was symbolic of the presence of Christ. When the presence of Christ is amongst his lambs, the wolf cannot come in. So that was just powerful. So we are not unaware of his intentions. We're not unaware of his devices. We better not be, because if we are, then what will happen is these things. He will steal, he will kill, he'll destroy. He will sever our friendships with each other. He will sever our relationships with each other. He will try to sever our relationship with God, because that's what he wants. That's his goal. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. David's pattern is very interesting. And no matter how dark his psalm is, he gets towards the end and he changes his perspective. He always focuses on God's character, or he refocuses on God's character, getting his focus off himself, getting his focus off of his situations. And that's very important. I will sing to the Lord. Oh, hold it. It wasn't just a matter of words, because he instantiated these confessions with his life, even though it seemed hopeless at the beginning, and even in the middle. In David's mind and heart, they have been cleared for worship. So it's very important that what seemed hopeless, once he begins to recognize that God is in control, and reviews God's character, and reviews So, let me repeat that. Even though it seemed hopeless at the beginning, sometimes it seemed hopeless even in the middle, sometimes it seems hopeless until the very end. David's mind and heart have been cleared for worship. He's reviewed God's character, he's reviewed his faithfulness, he's reviewed his provision, he's reviewed his power, his might, his awesomeness. Once he begins reviewing these things, he does have no choice except to begin worshiping. And that's what we see in verse 6. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. If you look at the progression to that, you have questions, then you have some imperatives, and then suddenly it turns away from the enemy having control, the enemy having victory, into the fact that he's trusted God, and then suddenly after he's encouraged his heart, he begins to sing. And that is, I think, an appropriate response, right? He ends with the hope of singing to the Lord because of his great generosity. And God is so generous to us. It's amazing how generous he is. Once you grasp how generous he is, songs will automatically come. And you may not even have songs memorized. There will be songs that will spontaneously come from your heart. Songs of joy and songs of thanksgiving. So, what are the takeaways? Good question. You may begin your prayer with questions. Honest questions. God will not fault you or be shocked at anything that you can ask him. So don't avoid them. Keeping in touch with your soul requires speaking to ourselves. So ask yourself the hard questions, and then get those answers from focusing on God and his his character, in his word, in his truth. We have an enemy. That's an important takeaway. But he is not flesh and blood, or she is not flesh and blood. Please remember that. But also, God is greater than our enemy. Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. It's 1 John. All this brings us to recognize God's sovereignty and generosity towards us through Christ. And that's a wonderful thing. I can't help but repeat how generous God is. And I remember when I was going through Youth with a Mission, one of my leaders, or one of the leaders there, would always begin his prayers, or somewhere in his prayers he would say, Lord, you have been so generous to me that it's embarrassing. And I thought that was very interesting, because he has been so generous. And I didn't really understand that at the time. And I'm beginning to understand that now, all these years later. So once you begin to recognize such generosity and the power and the sovereignty of God, this results in worship. And sometimes that will be with song. Shalom.